Hi there, this is John Wilkinson again from History Made Easier, with a presentation that sets out to provide an overview of what is meant by total war. And you'll see on the next slide that I provide a notes framework to help you. Total war encompasses a number of things: the scale of the war and the way in which the war is fought, the use of resources, including men and women, the degree of government control necessary to continue the fight, even the war aims of the belligerent powers. If enough of these things lean towards being very much in evidence, then it's reasonable to define the war as being total. The scale of the war is a factor often forgotten. The number of belligerent countries, the size of the armies, the number of fronts being fought over, the war at sea, and two, the number of casualties. The way in which the war is fought is also a factor. It can include whether it's limited to professional armies, or whether some form of national service, or with the war underway, conscription, had extended the number of soldiers that could be called upon. In World War I, as in World War II, recruits from the European empires added to the size of the armies too. And the war aims of the belligerent powers adds to the sense of scale. These will include Germany's September programme, the agreements made between Britain, France and Russia, as well as the different peace treaties. And don't forget the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. Ultimately, it was a war that no country could afford to lose. And surely that makes World War I a total war. How these armies were kept supplied is another factor. The degree to which national economies were directed to the war effort, the way in which civilians were used, the manner and degree of government control over economies, and the home front as a whole, including the need and use of propaganda. All things related to ensuring the production of war materials, and indeed the attempts to block the enemy's production, resulting in civilians seen as legitimate targets, because merchant seamen were civilians, and this meant the suspension of the normal rules of warfare. All things related to defeating the enemy. It can all be seen as evidence of total war. World War I demanded huge effort and sacrifices from the populations of countries all over the world, spreading out, as I've said already, to the European empires. The number of men in uniform was truly amazing. There were 43 million men for the Entente powers and their allies. Russia alone mobilized some 12 million men, while France recruited 67% of its male population into its army, only to recall 500,000 of them for essential work at home. And 23 million men fought for the Central Powers, a total of 66 million men and women. So it was that in some countries, Britain, France and Germany as examples, the war affected every family, with either a husband or a father or a son, an uncle, a cousin, a fiancé or a close friend at the front. Civilian populations were caught up in the war too. Victims of war crimes, deliberate attempts at genocide, or else fleeing as refugees. and they were also targeted by the blockades that Britain and Germany sought to impose. In other words, they weren't always accidents of war. They were meant to suffer. It's been estimated that 6.5 million civilians died. Russia suffered 1.5 million civilian deaths. Germany 426,000. Austria-Hungary over 450,000. Serbia much the same. Serbia suffered about 3 times more civilian deaths than military deaths, and the worst death toll per head of population of all the belligerent countries. Italy suffered about 600,000 deaths, France 300,000, Britain over 100,000, mostly merchant sailors. Little Belgium 62,000, and the Ottoman Empire a staggering 2 million. This figure includes the Turks' massacres of Armenians. Overseeing everything to a degree unimagined before the war were the governments of the belligerent powers, who took increasingly dictatorial controls of the economies and of society as a whole. State controls, as well as the size of the state, that's their bureaucracies, grew to levels not previously thought possible in autocratic states, never mind states some way down the path to becoming democracies. The governments of all the major powers took on extraordinary powers as the demands of the war and the fear of the cost of losing it increased. Not least conscription. I cannot exaggerate how big a deal conscription was. Men were being forced to go to war with a very good chance of being badly hurt or even killed. In a war on such a scale and of such a length, the economy was vitally important. This meant workforces were controlled to a degree unimaginable before the war. Armaments production, of course, but coal production too, essential for electricity and still the dominant fuel for battleships. And communications were all brought under government control, even if companies remained in private hands. Food production was, of course, another critical priority. The workforces put up with increased working hours, as well as shortages, and don't forget, rationing was enforced in all the belligerent countries, and there were high prices, all the result of economic warfare. Women were brought into the workforce in unprecedented numbers, and in unprecedented ways too. And something dear to my heart, in Britain, the sale of alcohol was tightly controlled too, and the beer was watered down. France introduced direct taxation during World War I to help pay for the war effort, but still had to meet 80% of its costs by borrowing and printing money, with the inevitable result of high inflation. That World War I was a total war could also be clearly seen in the war at sea. Britain, as a small island, relied totally on sea routes to adequately supply its military and its civilian population. But Germany and Austria-Hungary too, with much of their borders surrounded by hostile powers, notably France, Italy and Russia, were also in an extremely vulnerable position. The longer the war went on, the more critical supplies became. This was total war, and both sides attempted to blockade the other and squeeze the life out of their ability to continue the fight. So, that's my look at World War I as a total war. I hope it was useful for you, particularly my framework, something I find so useful and I use all the time in order to target potential questions. You know, you should use me any way you find useful. Sign up to my channel, use my website, History Made Easier, and you may be interested in tutorials. I'm here to help. But for now, thank you so much for listening, and the best of luck with your studies. Cheers.